Welcome to our webinar explaining the newly passed Tennessee Teacher Bill of Rights. We are delighted to have bill sponsor State Representative Jay Reedy, who is representative in Houston, Humphreys, and West Montgomery counties. We are also delighted to have Audrey Shores, who is Professional Educator of Tennessee's Chief Operating Officer and one of our state lobbyists. And we'll turn this over to Audrey right now.
All right, so the best place to begin would be at the beginning. So where this all started, a lot of people don't realize it's actually been years in the making as we've gradually built up a list working with various classroom teachers, especially our members, of the rights and protections that they wanted written into the code. We had a code of ethics, but there was no Bill of Rights, and that didn't seem right to balance it out. So our executive director, J.C. Bowman, had created this list that he had with him, and he took this to State Senator Mark Green and had a meeting one day, and Senator Green thought that this was a great idea. It was something that was absolutely needed. So he took this list on a statewide listening tour. So he went around when he was thinking about running for governor, met with teachers all across the state, talked about their concerns and what they felt was needed, and compared that to the list and decided which ones were the most important and what were the key components. After that, he is the one who initially filed the first piece of legislation. And then we had our state representative who's with us today, Jay Reedy, who signed on as the House sponsor of the bill. So after that, Senator Jim Tracy signed on as a co-sponsor as well to help keep things moving along. And as the bill got refined and went through a few revisions and assessments, it gradually came to be known as the Teacher's Bill of Rights. So not every bill necessarily has to have a name. This was Senate Bill 14 and House Bill 174 as people were following along, but because of the content of it, it just gradually became known as the Teacher's Bill of Rights. So the next question for a lot of people is, what does it do? It applies not only to teachers, despite the moniker, it's actually teachers, principals, anyone who really falls under educator, anyone who is a school personnel. And it creates a list of rights and protections for those educators, which is exactly what it sounds like. Gradually, we added more and more co-sponsors in the Senate. We added 4 additional co-sponsors. In the House, there is 8 or 9 additional co-sponsors as well. So it was very popular and very well received as it's made its way through the committees. A lot of people signed on to it, and it had a lot of support. So talking about the legislation itself, I am going to let Representative Reedy give you a little bit more information on that and discuss the details.
Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak about this exciting piece of legislation. It really is not in its true form when we began because there were some things, a lot of folks not understanding the political process. We had to let some things go in this bill that I thought were really good. One of the items that was, we're going to go just call it what it was, stripped out of the bill, and it was the discussion on how a teacher gets evaluated. And of course, my wife is a teacher, and with that, the gist of it is each year when she gets evaluated, well, you should have somebody with a like type specialty field. If you're a chemist, you teach chemistry, somebody with a chemistry degree, as the bill was written, would take and evaluate that teacher or / educator. And with that, a lot of schools would have had difficulty hiring a second person to do this. But folks, keep in mind that this bill, the Teacher's Bill of Rights, is just a platform for us to build on. So let's get to what we finally accomplished in the end, and to let folks listening to this understand, whatever the bill passes, in the House, it needs to read the same in the Senate, and both houses have to agree on word-for-word document that the governor finally signs off of. So what does this legislation do? Well, it spells out many parts of the code where it's impacted, and one of the discussion that come up in the Senate is here we had the word educator and then we had teacher. Then we finally just made that fall under an educator, somebody who in their profession is licensed, they become the educator. All right, so with that, we've got the terminology put in there. For the purpose of this section, educator means any teacher, principal, supervisor, or other individuals required by law to hold a valid license of qualification for employment in the public schools of this state. From there, we went to the next section of this bill, is that these educators had the right to be treated with civility and respect, have his or her professional judgment and discretion respected, report any errant, offensive, or abusive content or behavior of students to school officials or appropriate agencies. With this specific part of the bill, taking it to the different committees, it was interesting. Folks sitting on the Education Committee, a lot of the question was, are they not already respected in the school system? And I have to say a big thank you to Representative John DeBerry, because he made a statement that was profound. After what he said about know that they are not respected, then one of the Education Committee members in the House asked, who really thinks that this is necessary? And me, I turned around to the audience, which was full of educators, and there were people with the thumbs up, that are shaking their heads yes, or just raising their hand to let them know that this bill was important to them. So that was, I really appreciated that support. It felt good, because it seemed like it was a huge uphill push trying to get the point across of this bill. The next section of this bill, it was to share information, share information regarding a student's educational experience, health, or safety within the student's parent or legal guardian, unless otherwise prohibited by state law or the federal, which is the FERPA code, and will have the ability to review all instructional material or curriculum prior to those materials being utilized for instruction of students. And keep in mind, it's a lot of times, and I get to live with this experience, because my wife being a teacher, is a lot of the curriculum, they have it tough, because they have got to plan their week ahead of time so they know what instruction they're giving in the classroom. For some reason, if it ever happens, a snow day, for an example, something comes up, it really throws them off of schedule, or if the teacher is sick, how to get the substitute teacher to fill in. But with that, they do have the right to look at that curriculum before they try to present it. So that becomes a real important issue as well. The other parts of this bill, make sure I'm on the right slide. The legislation, and this was a hot button, and to many of the educators, and really across our state, when you talk about the underfunding for classroom supplies, and there were additional bills being pushed out there trying to get more money into the teacher's classroom for whatever they need to do to maintain a professional environment and keeping the curriculum. Maybe it was the printed material, or having money to buy ink to print the material for the handouts daily. So with that, it came to that the teacher is required to use their personal money to appropriately equip the classroom. So with that, Representative Eddie Smith, he had a bill that finally we moved the needle to $200 per classroom, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But once again, we're considering this bill to be a foundation. This legislation was always designed to be built upon in the future. It was our idea to pass what we could this session and revisit the legislation as needed. So currently, yes, I with professional educators of Tennessee, teachers in my district. Matter of fact, I'm getting a few across the state. They have ideas on how to build on this, and I look forward to the opportunity to, number one, visit with them, but also to push it, because in the end, we're trying to bring all of our students across the state up to a specific level of education because of the constant changing environment in industry. The high technology, the automation of equipment, computers continue to get bigger, better all the time, and we have to have a good workforce that knows how to work with these computers. So with that, I believe that I just need to take and turn it back over to you, Audrey.
All right. So, well, we'll go kind of right back to where you were about the funding for classroom supplies. So the bill that you referenced ended up being put under this part of the code, 49.3.359. And as teachers are certainly aware, previously they got $100. It was $200, but they got $100, and $100 typically went to the school. It was often pooled. Sometimes, we've heard varying accounts of whether or not the teachers got, how much say in what was done with it. So this bill essentially said that entire $200 has to go directly to the teachers. A little bit of background, there was also another bill going through at the same time that ultimately did not pass that wanted to increase that total amount from 200 to 400, and then so the schools would still get to keep half of it, but then the teachers would also still get a full $200. Of course, that came with a huge fiscal note, and so that one ultimately did not succeed and actually, get passed and made into a law, but the full $200 going to the actual teacher did. So that dovetails, right with that last part of the Teacher's Bill of Rights. There has been a little bit of confusion over that, though, with BEP funds, as there often is with BEP funds. So the question of whether or not that $200 is part of the BEP, which it's not specifically a component of the BEP. It's that $200, it's a separate law from BEP funds. That $200 can be taken out of the BEP, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So I'll let Representative Reedy talk a little bit more about the details of the funding aspect of this.
Really, and with that, I appreciate you once again. It was interesting. I had a number of school districts contacting me by phone, well, I guess it wasn't the school districts themselves, but the educators out of those school districts trying to understand what was going on with this. And part of the school districts, they were still just wanting to give the teacher $100 and then keep $100 kind of in a pool of money to buy supplies, be it toner. I even heard some folks, well, that money goes paying for the lease on the large printers that the school system uses. And it was interesting, they were saying, some of these folks saying, well, the school system said, well, they had to keep that money, that extra $100 in reserve because they didn't know where it was coming from, and they said it was basically an unfunded mandate. In other words, here they were going to have to scramble to get extra dollars out of their school system to pay for this. And finally, I had to get a hold of the Department of Education, Elizabeth Fiveash, and I said, plain and simple, is this a funded or unfunded mandate that we just created for the school districts? And she said, absolutely not. We fully funded BEP, and also part of this funding for this bill that you passed in the House and the Senate, the governor signed off of for this $200, you folks fully funded it for all the school districts throughout the state. Now, I have to tell you and everyone else out there listening to this, I don't totally get the BEP formula. I had a number of folks try to explain it to me, and what I have finally realized, BEP funding is not the same for every school district, and all of that's going on depending on the ruralness of the areas, that it costs more money to educate some students than in other areas. So with that, actually the comptroller's office has put together a BEP calculator that anybody in the world that has access to a computer can look at the BEP numbers, the formulas, look at the different school districts, how they're funded. Also, it's interesting, every county by state law are required, out of their funding for that county, must meet a certain threshold limit of what that county will provide for education in that county, and then the state comes in and makes up the rest of that funding. So certainly this is probably a good topic later if somebody ever wants that, to do a webinar on BEP funding and what would be some good examples. So certainly with that, once again, I appreciate Representative Eddie Smith being in this battle for our students, for education, and I really look forward to what we can do to improve our school systems, because all of the different school districts are not on the same playing field, and it's interesting how well some students in different parts of our state are excelling, and in the other parts of the state where they're falling behind. So with that, once again, Audrey, I do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Absolutely, and we appreciate your help with this and other pieces of legislation, and we're still going to be working on this with you and with Representative Eddie Smith, who was the sponsor of that bill, and how it's being implemented, and maybe how that can be further strengthened. And you're right, the BEP formula could be an entire series of webinars that we could work on. So it's a very complicated formula. They made some adjustments within the past couple years to make it a little bit less convoluted, but it's tricky because in part, people talk about the BEP and the different components as though this amount of money goes to this particular thing. The BEP is a formula. It's not a strict, this is how the money has to be spent. So oftentimes, even though a dollar amount may be calculated under one particular category, there's nothing that says that dollar amount has to be spent in that category. The district may decide, well, we need money. We don't really need money for textbooks. We really need money to hire a new, physics teacher instead. So we'll definitely probably, work on that in the future and try to get some more details, try to explain it in a little bit simpler terms how BEP works. You hear about it a lot when teacher raises come up as well. So that is definitely a good topic. So back to the Teachers' Bill of Rights, like Representative Reedy was saying, it's really meant to be a solid foundation. There were parts of it that, like you mentioned, the evaluation piece that started out in the bill that we weren't able to, get through this time. But our main focus for this session was to get the Bill of Rights there, to build a framework for it and something that we can build on in the future. So, now in coming sessions, we can take those more difficult to tackle pieces that maybe need to be dealt with individually instead of this one giant bill, and work on those and see how we can get some solutions to that, such as, the evaluators was a big piece of it. But, it can take an entire session just to hammer out a sentence in a bill and really get those little details. So it was really amazing that this entire bill with all of those different parts of it was passed unanimously.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Oh no.
That almost never happens. It passed 88-0 in the House and 30-0 in the Senate. So we were very honored to work on this with various members of the General Assembly, as well as the bill sponsors. Of course, there's everyone on the education committees. There's a subcommittee and then the committee. So there are a lot of steps that a bill has to go through before it finally gets up and passes and becomes a law. And we are really honored to work with the people that we did on this piece of legislation, and it was a really great experience and had a lot of support. And thank you, Representative Reedy, both for working with us on the bill and for being here today to help us explain it to the teachers.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Right. And if you need any more information, you can always contact us either through the website or by phone. This or any other issue, we are happy to discuss it with you. Thank you. All right, Bethany.
I may not have done this right, and I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to find out.